What's up, guys? Dom here, and we are going to do a now traditional thing on this channel, which is our group stage preview. We're going to go through every single group, starting with Group A, and pretty much just give all my takes on the strengths and weaknesses of each team, how I expect the interactions to go, what teams are going to come out on top. I'm going to do them in order of my pick'em, so which team I decide to put in first will be the first one I cover. Last one, obviously, will be the NA team. The team that will probably come in fourth in the group. So yeah, I'm going to get into it and we'll see where it goes. So the first team that I want to talk about is in Group A, FPX. I think that they are the favorites to win this group. And from what I can gather, it seems like they're the favorites to win the tournament. Almost everyone on social media will have them as the number one team. I checked the Reddit pick'ems. They were number one there. They're number one pretty much everywhere I can find. Most analysts have them as the best team in the world, even though they did lose 3-1 to EDG. So let's start with their strengths. They have an insane mid laner in DoNB. He is just the absolute most flexible player in pretty much the entire world. I think he's absolutely insane. Love watching this guy play. And the thing that makes this guy so special is how many different counter picks he has to whatever champion you play. So normally when you look at a mid laner, they'll have a bunch of blindable champions, and then they'll have just the standard counter picks that everyone kind of knows. You know, if somebody picks a Sylas, they'll pick a Ryze into it, or one of these picks that most people have in their arsenal because of how often they've been played throughout the whole entire season. And DoNB is one of these guys that has really unique counters. Everyone knows about his Kled mid, which is something that he used to counter champions like Akali. If Sylas is blinded into him, you definitely pick a Kled mid. But he also has a ton of other picks that are super strong, and he doesn't need to cheese you with a counter pick to necessarily be really good in the game. So I just think draft phase in general is extremely difficult into FPX. So when you think about how you want to draft into FPX, you're going to have to do your first 3 bans. There's whatever will be OP for the tournament, but normally people want to drop specific bans. One champion that I think people will be banning pretty much every single game into FPX would be Aurelia. And the reason is not just that DoNB is so insane on it, but it's also a flex pick. Nuguri didn't play it too much in playoffs and in the later part of the season once Aurelia got changed and got buffs. But if you guys remember back to spring, this is a huge champion for Nuguri. He is extremely good on it. And because it is such a strong flex for them, you almost never want to give Aurelia to FPX. I mean, in general, it seems like you don't want to give Aurelia to anyone these days. This champion is just absolutely absurd. So yeah, Aurelia, something you always want to ban. Another champion that people ban quite frequently is TF. Haven't seen too much TF at World so far, but it's something that you always have to consider, especially because it plays into DoNB's strength. He's just one of those guys that has a good idea for playmaking around the map. I consider him the best playmaking player in the world. He's just got that vision, and I think it's part of the way that he's able to play out games. He has great engage potential because of his ability to just see angles that no one else sees. So let's say you ban out Aurelia and TF. Okay, well, that's fine. You're hurting DoNB's champion pool, but it gives the other players on FPX champions that they could do extremely well on. Everyone knows about TN's Lee Sin, right? Like, TN is one of the absolute best Lee Sin players in the world. People remember the World Championship where he ended up winning. He was finals MVP, I believe, and he did it mainly on Lee Sin. I just threw up my notes here so you guys can kind of see what I'm dealing with. Another champion that is really heavily prioritized by FPX would be the Aphelios for LWX. Now, I think LWX actually gets a really bad rap. I think he's underrated in a lot of ways. People look at LWX and they're like, oh man, he ints in team fights, bro. I watched LPL once. I watched spring finals. He was playing Kai'Sa. He would ult into the whole enemy team every single time, and he would just die first. Yeah, he does that, which is why it's really good for him that those champions are not in the meta anymore. It's like Aphelios and MF and these champions that are hard to run into the whole enemy team with. So I actually think that's a benefit for this team, because Aphelios is really good, and he's somebody that outputs a lot of damage in team fights. And that's part of the reason why he sometimes has these brain dead ints, is because he is one of the first AD carries to open up and start dealing damage, where a lot of people will pick their positioning a lot more, which is obviously good in some situations, but at times you could miss out on a lot of potential damage in a fight if you decide to wait to open up. Crisp plays a ton of Thresh, which not only pairs well with Aphelios, but it also pretty much keeps LWX safe in lane, and it's something that they like to play a lot. Not only will they be able to pressure you in lane, Crisp also will roam mid, and you just have the situation where if Crisp and Tien are unlocked and they're having a good game and DoNB is also looking for these plays, it just becomes extremely difficult to actually deal with DoNB. I actually think in a lot of ways, it might be just better to not ban any mid laners and just let DoNB have something. You know he's going to be insane. He's going to have a good game, but maybe you can hurt FPX more by banning out some of the other champions that they're really proficient on. Because in my opinion, there's just too many mid laners to ban out, right? You have TF, you have Aurelia, which is a flex. Maybe Aurelia is the only one you do end up banning out, but there's also Ryze, there's also Galio. So that right there is 4 champions. You got 3 bans, there's 4 champions you need to ban out. Ryze, Galio, TF. Obviously, these champions have counter picks, but it feels like even if you do counter pick somebody like DoNB, he just ends up roaming and making the plays anyway, and you won't have enough of a lane lead on him to actually be able to abuse the fact that he is moving around the map so much. So yeah, other thing, like I said earlier, I think DoNB is the best engaging mid laner in the entire world. Pretty much goes without saying. I don't know what else I can say about that. He just sees ways to engage team fights that other people don't, and I think that this combos really well with LWX, because LWX will play so well off those engages. He'll be able to follow up that damage instantly, and I just love seeing how well DoNB can get things started for his team and enable the rest of his teammates. For weaknesses of this team, TN obviously sometimes disappears. He's hit or miss. We saw this in finals. For my money, he had a terrible finals. I mean, this is somebody who would have been probably like on the tail end of my top 25 list if he played better in that series, but he had a really terrible finals. I think he's one of the biggest issues as to why FPX didn't end up winning this. Nuggery's laning, also really suspect. This guy will really make the most out of that 0-2 meme. It didn't happen as much later on in the LPL season, but he had some terrible games, just dying in the most random ways. There was one game where I believe he was playing into Gwen as Jace, and I'm pretty sure he died level 1 or something to a flash Gwen. So yeah, Nuggery has some really bad games sometimes. He will into lane. He normally is better outside of lane than a lot of top laners. He's smart about the game. He knows where to be on the map. But I don't know. That's a weakness, bro. You can't just go 0-2 all the time. The 0-2 meme is funny until you start losing games, and then it just becomes you getting benched for Zhao Laohu. And then, yeah, like I said earlier, LWX, although I do think he's underrated, he does run it down sometimes. It's not good. Your AD carry just randomly running it down could be bad for you at certain points. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of just my take from watching so much LPL. Okay, so I gave these teams little names too. So FPX, I have the popular vote because yeah, they're the team that everyone thinks is gonna win. Okay, Dom 1. These names, bro, you're just gonna have to bear with me on this. I just can't put them on the spot. Like, what do I think about the team? They got the champion heart, man. This team just has that X factor, and I think a lot of it boils down to Showmaker, but just in general, it feels like you won't beat Dom 1 unless you play super well, where other teams will be prone to collapsing, or you can beat them not on your best day. But if you have an off day, if FPX shows up the same way they did in finals, I think Dom 1 could easily come out of this group as the #1 seed. So strengths, best 2v2 mid jungle in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean they have the best mid laner and the best jungler. It's more that they have the best combination of skill between their mid laner and jungle, better than anyone else. Also, jungle picks, I think it could really suit Canyon well. I mean, he's super good on Kiana. I believe when he was playing mid lane, he actually, because obviously there was all those role swap earlier for Dom 1, he played some Kiana, and I think that's just a pick that he's proficient on. Talon might come in. We saw some bans on it. We saw some people play it in play-ins. Could work well for Canyon and his style of play. Talia as well is something that he has always been really good at. He plays it a lot in solo queue, and I think that Canyon would be great on all these picks. Graves and Nidalee are kind of more back in the meta than they were before. I mean, goes without saying that Xin, Lee Sin, everyone's going to be playing those, but I'm just kind of going into what I think makes Canyon special and things that he'll be able to do that other people won't be able to do. So Graves, Nidalee, they're coming back into the meta. They're these fringe picks that are good sometimes, but not like first pickable, or you don't want them every single game. But I think Graves is definitely the more popular of the two, because now we're starting to see Graves be flexed into solo lanes, potentially top is the most common one, but in certain situations you could even put it mid. So obviously the best Graves and Nidalee player in the world having access to these picks is a good thing for Dom 1. Showmaker, I just think he's got like the champion mindset. He's got that Kobe Bryant, that MJ X factor, where you just feel like he's going to find a way to win. And you're not going to beat him by just being better than him. You're going to have to beat the rest of his team hard enough where he won't be able to carry the game. Like he's MJ going to drop 60 on like the 80s Bulls or some shit. So yeah, I went into a little bit of his mindset, and I think that's like really the scariest thing about him. Obviously, he's a completely phenomenal player. He has proficiency on pretty much every champion that's meta. Whatever ends up good at the tournament, Showmaker's going to be able to play it. He's going to be able to play it well. This is what you expect from a guy like this. But it's not so much that I think makes him so scary. I think it's all the intangibles and just that aura that he has in these games. So yeah, I think that in general, the meta might suit Dom1. We'll have to see how it shapes up in group stage. So far, we've been seeing a lot of like Kennen, Jace. Aurelia, I put a question mark because I'm not sure how good Khan will actually be on this pick right now, or if they'll end up just banning it. But I think in general, bot laners being pickable 1, 2, 3 and having some blindable top lane champions is good for Dom1 because they can give agency in the draft to Canyon. And if Canyon's able to get a really nice Talia game or a super good Kiana game, this guy can absolutely pop off and carry. So I actually think that the meta might be suitable towards Dom1. Another thing that I wanted to mention would be the MF pick coming in, because MF is in that same vein of champions. Like, for example, Varus, Ashe, like all these stable bot laners that are going to be pretty good at playing weak side. You can pick them early in the draft and they don't have to like really pop off with auto attacks or do a lot of crazy good shit in game. They can kind of just exist and then do their job. And I think that's what Ghost does best for the team. So we'll have to see how this shapes up. MF maybe ends up being super OP, right? Like if MF is super OP and it gets banned, maybe this ends up hurting Dom1 and they're having to draft things like Aphelios or Ezreal, and those are not champions that you can kind of sideline as well as MF, who you can just focus on. You could just focus on your positioning and get a good ult in a fight. So weaknesses kind of started going into here, which is no real firepower / carry potential out of top and bot lane compared to before. So I'm mainly saying top lane compared to before, because obviously Nuguri had that ability to pretty much play everything. He was just, in my mind, just a better top laner than Khan overall. I think Ghost was able to coast last Worlds on utility 80 carries, but if MF is taken away, how well do they do? With that, I'm starting to also get the same feeling from Dom1 that they don't really get challenged in their own region enough. So maybe they're not in as good shape at the beginning of the tournament because they haven't played against as good teams. Like, is there a team that can challenge them as hard as FPX in Korea? There's not. There's just no one. It's T1. But even in the T1 Dom1 series, that was like a pretty sloppy series, and I don't feel like T1 actually felt like they were going to win the series at any point. At least rewatching it, that's the vibe that I got. And yeah, one thing that I've noticed watching them too is that they're not generally a super proactive team in the early game, and they generally rely on their superior team fighting to win a lot of games. There are some games where they get a big early lead, like for example in the Nongshim series. I believe it was the Nongshim series. I just remember seeing them play or develop pretty good leads. They even actually threw a pretty big lead in, I think it was like a Yasuo Diana game. I'm trying to remember all these off the top of my head. Maybe I got the team wrong, but I remember this game distinctly where they ended up having this big throw around Baron, and you didn't used to see that out of old Dom1. So yeah, I mean, just in general, I think that not having a proactive early game and relying on team fights leaves you susceptible to teams coming in and actually punching you in the mouth, getting early leads on you and snowballing. And if you're not used to playing that type of style, you might not respond to it as well, which will leave you at a gold disadvantage that you can't overcome. Okay, next. This is going to be a long video, I can already tell. I always start with these notes and I'm like, oh, I'm going to only talk about this for 5 minutes. Ends up being like an hour and a half. All right, Rogue, the biggest chokers in EU. So their strengths, they all have, they're all good players on this roster. There's no one on this roster who you can say is a bad player. I know people always shit on Larson now, but Larson has been one of like the top 3 mid laners in EU for like 2 years now. This guy is actually good. He just has this weird quality where he's always a little bit worse than you'd expect from him when it matters, and it makes people just really turned off to him. One of the biggest strengths of Rogue is that they have an extremely smart jungler. When you look at Inspired, he's somebody who really understands the game. He has intelligent pathing. He has a deep game understanding of lane states, dive timings. He's good at tracking the enemy jungle. Pretty much everything that you'd want out of your standard jungler, right? This guy is phenomenally talented, and somebody who up until recently everyone would have said is by far and away the best jungler in EU. And no one would have even said it was close before playoffs, where Rogue collapsed once again and just lost a ton of games. I think they have the second best bot lane in the group. Some people actually think that Rogue has the best bot lane in the group. I know it's arguable. I don't actually think they're a better bot lane than Crisp and LWX. We'll have to see. I think that most people write off Crisp and LWX, but even if you consider FPX having a massively unstable team fight bot lane, in terms of laning, generally LWX is pretty strong in this area. I would say though that Trimby and Hans are better than Damon's bot lane of Ghost and Barrel. Ghost and Barrel still seem a little bit shaky in lane. So I think that is really good. Also, if you think about all the picks that are possible here, you could have some interesting bot lanes being pulled out. You have Draven, which is obviously a Han Sama special. Kalista, another Han Sama special. Lucian is in that same vein of like these aggressive AD carries that really want to stomp you in lane. So maybe we see Lucian with like the standard Leonas that we're seeing all the time, or maybe we see Lucian Nami and Trimby is able to actually, you know, play that well because this guy seems to be versatile. He can play enchanters, he can play things like Morgana, he can play his engage supports. I feel like over the year I got higher and higher on Trimby. I actually think this guy is talented, and I think his strength is in lane. So yeah, that is how I feel about their bot lane. I think it's one of their major advantages. Also, they have a strong top laner who prefers to play things like Kennen in general. Odo's always been good at Kennen. He's always been good at Gnar. Those have been champions that have been in his wheelhouse for as long as I can remember. And both those champions are extremely viable right now, which I think fares well for Rogue. For weaknesses, got to talk about Rogue time. I know people are tired of hearing about Rogue time. It's overused. People talk about it way too much. But the core of the idea is actually still there. For those that don't know what Rogue time is, there's this like area where it comes to the mid game around 20 minutes where it just feels like they always end up stalling out and they stop pushing their lead, and a couple bad things will generally happen. And suddenly Rogue goes from having a 10k gold lead at 20 minutes to only having a 5k gold lead. And I think that this problem is exacerbated by the fact that Rogue in general plays a lot of these lane dominant early game picks. Like they love Kalista and shit like that. Well, if you're up 10k gold with Kalista and then you throw 5k gold and then suddenly you only have a 5k gold lead at 30 minutes with a Kalista comp, you're not winning anymore once the enemy AD carry has 3 items. So it's not so much that just they have horrible mid game. It's also that they pick for early game. So when they have these mistakes in their mid game, it just becomes a lot worse than it actually is. They have obvious problems with pressure. You see them consistently underperform when things happen in games that are substandard. Maybe they get ganked once, or they don't see a dive coming and they aren't prepared for it. People aren't ready to TP. The jungler is not hovering the right lane at the right time. Suddenly, everything just goes to shit and they just go out like a whisper. They're just really bad at dealing with controversy. That being said, I don't think, or adversity, I guess I should say. But that being said, I don't think this should matter too much in this group because they're not expected favorites. It feels like when Rogue is just considered another team, they play fine. As soon as the pressure really is on and it's like, oh shit, you're expected to beat this team, then everything just goes out the window and they just become a shell of themselves. So I think that the fact that they are considered to be the 3rd or 4th team clearly in this group could actually be an advantage for them. Nothing to choke on. Yeah, I think mid lane champion pool could also be an issue. When you think about Larson, he's mainly a mage player. He also added Lucian mid, which I think was really good this year. Definitely like the Lucian mid, but Lucian mid is no longer that good. It's pretty much only a bot laner these days. So that could be tough. And then also MF coming in to like stonewall lanes. You just end up with like an MF Leona bot lane that you can't really pressure too hard. This might reduce the ability for their bot lane to snowball. So yeah, definitely think that this could be an issue for Rogue. C9, boys, last team in the group. I have them in 4th, C9, and I put NA Copium because things are not looking good as of now going into the group stage. For the strengths, I think C9 seems to have perks in better form than he's been in all year. He's stopped randomly inting to every gank. He's been playing lanes out a lot better. Obviously, he is playing against Plains mid laners, but I think that in general, you can tell that he seems a lot more disciplined at Worlds than he seemed in LCS. So I think that's good. The fact that he's been able to get through lanes a lot more even enables one of his biggest strengths, which is his good side laning, his mid game map play, to really show through in a lot of these games. So that's good. That's great for C9. Fudge, an extremely solid. He makes good use of counter picks in lanes, and he plays most lanes fundamentally well. Like he really, if you've talked to Fudge before, you know that he really thinks about lanes down to the nitty gritty. And a lot of it comes from like his relationship with LS. He just seems like he's in that mold of like, I want to play things perfectly. What should I do on this wave? How do I play the first 3 waves in this matchup against this champion? When am I going to try to take good bases? And a lot of players have a general idea of this, but I would say that Fudge has a more accurate perception of how lane should go and how he wants to play out lanes before he goes into game than a lot of top laners. And I really respect that. That's part of the reason why I think Fudge is so good. Blabber has stopped being Crabber. He stopped inting for Crab. Hurrah. He finally stopped Inting for Crab. God bless. So far this tournament, he's been able to hold back his wild dog ass sniffing aggression. I don't know why I wrote that. I really don't, but I think it's a thing. I think he's been able to kind of tame that beast in him and play a little bit better. He still has those random ints. I remember today there was a Herald fight where he's giving a shutdown to go in 1v3 and he goes 1-for-1 but gives a shutdown. Obviously not worth it, which is that wild dog ass sniffing aggression. But I think in general he's been pretty good. So him coming into the tournament, playing on a good level, great for Cloud9. Also, I think they have some interesting drafts that could come out. They're one of the teams that liked trying things mainly in Spring Split, but AP jungle potential with something like Gravestop could be interesting. Maybe Talia and strong laners. That's another thing too. Blabber is a very talented Talia player. It's one of his best champions, I think. So the fact that that is now available to you, it's great. I love it. I think that C9 will do a lot better if they start pulling out some of these picks and they give teams different looks, especially versus Rogue. Weaknesses. Okay, so this is one of the problems that I always see with Cloud9. There has never been a time where all 5 Cloud9 members are playing well at the same time. That's an issue. You never have all 5 players being good. Someone is always having a fucking terrible time in their role. In Plains, it was Fudge. Completely understandable because he's a rookie playing in LCS. That was his first games. He had a horrible lock-in tournament. Then you move on, and at MSI, Blabber was running it down. That's where the whole Crabber thing started. People started flaming him in general. He just had a very bad MSI. He played way under the level than you'd expect. Then Blabber started getting his shit together. And in summer, Perks was just running it down. People were flaming him, bro. Perks, accountability. Anyone remember that shit? That came because he was having a bad summer split. Obviously, I thought the idea of the thread was stupid. Not down with that at all. But in general, like, he was underperforming when you consider the level that you expect from a player like Perks. Now we're at Worlds and the bot lane is inting. Bot lane is underperforming. Vulcan is randomly dying in lane. Like, he had the terrible Amumu game where he's like ulting at the bot lane turret. He's flash missing bandages mid. He dies level 2. Like, it was a horrible game from Vulcan, right? And Vulcan is a really good player. If you've ever played with Vulcan in solo queue, you know this guy is talented, which is why it sucks that every now and then, like, these players will just severely underperform. Then today, yeah, I'm recording this on the 9th, by the way, so this is when they 3-0'd Peace. Sven had a first 2 terrible games. He even tweeted out after. He's like, man, I fucking ran it down. It made me angry. In the 3rd game, I actually smurfed. It always happens. This is not a recipe for success. Like, you have to actually have all 5 players performing at least at a reasonable level for them. They don't all have to be playing at their absolute maximum potential all the time. But generally, you don't want to see this, where somebody is just running it, like severely underperforming. And I'm not really sure why this happens for Cloud9, but after a full year, it seems to be a consistent issue. Yeah, they don't seem comfortable on a lot of the Lucian MF lanes, which is what we saw today, compared to the lanes that they were playing before. So they're playing a lot of Varus lanes. I mean, Sven has always said that he hates Varus, but I feel like it's one of his best champions. So it felt like they were just way stronger on this before. They had a poor adaptation to the meta in general. Bot lane is what I'm talking about here. And C9 has that quality where they are prone to pulling the NA. As they always lose games that are supposed to be wins. Even if they upset a top team, they can always lose to Rogue and ruin their chances. Yeah, if it is a 3-3 tiebreak and Cloud9 is playing in that game, I am just expecting them to lose because it always happens, bro. So yeah, that's my takes on Group A, and we will move into Group B now. All right, boys, we're gonna get into Group B, and the first team I want to talk about today is EDG, who I believe to get first in the group, and the title that I gave them is Bot Gap Incoming. Now, EDG has the absolute best mechanical AD in the entire world, which is Viper. Guy is absolutely insane. He is super consistent. He's always strong in games. He is somebody that you can rely on to always be someone who's going to perform when it matters. I was really impressed with him in LPL. I know there were some questions after his time on Hanwha Life because the team looked so terrible, but I think he answered all of those, and he's shown that he really is a world-class talent. This guy is fucking amazing. Huge strength. Scout as well. Great form in finals. Pretty good form throughout all of LPL, to be honest. Had a small dip when the team was losing some series, but this guy is really solid on all the meta champions. He has Ryze, LeBlanc, Silas. The other thing I wanted to mention is his ability to play Lulu. which actually has been a flex for EDG. Now, it's not very popular in the meta, but it's something that they could potentially pull out. Xin obviously pairs really well with Lulu. Then there's also options of Lulu plus carry bot lane if people try to pick things like Braum. So if you blind Braum into EDG, you're in for a bad time. They can play Ezreal Karma. They can play Lulu Cog. Like, they're going to be able to punish those types of picks. So if we get into situations where the draft becomes really telegraphed around bot lane, I think EDG will have a very big advantage here. They're super proficient at finding matchups that are really powerful into certain comps. So things that they pulled out include Lulu Cog, Ezreal Karma, Kalista Taric, Kalista Set, Ezreal Rakan. Now, Kalista hasn't been played that much right now. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to play Kalista, but I'm just kind of trying to give you guys some information about how good EDG's bot lane really is and how versatile they are at playing whatever they consider really strong for the game. They make good use of counter pick. Support counter pick matters a lot for them. And yeah, I just think EDG is a team that becomes really scary in that regard. So if people are picking MF first, like I said, expect some counter picks to come out. I feel like even though most people haven't been able to find counters, I feel like if any team could, it would be EDG. So for weaknesses, I have here that they are prone to tilting, which I'm making a distinction from choking. So choking to me is just underperforming because of pressure. Tilting is different, where I feel like EDG gets frustrated if they play at a level that they don't expect themselves to play at. And if that ends up happening, it feels like everything collapses for them, which is, I think, part of the reason why a lot of people don't have them as the strongest team from LPL, even though they did end up winning LPL, which is pretty rare. A lot of it just comes down to the fact that they just have this quality that sets a lot of people off. They can smell out that potential nervousness, that tilt factor, and in such a long tournament like Worlds, you don't get a second chance. If they lost to WE, if they underperform in a best of 5 in quarterfinals, they're out. That's it. They're done. Where other teams seem more resilient than them. So I think that is an issue. JJ specifically has been really spotty. He had a horrible series against WE. He got benched after the first 2 games. They had to run in GenG, who's actually there with EDG at Worlds. When I was doing my tracking the pros, I actually was watching a lot of GenG play. And this was not something where they're running a 6-man roster, and GenG was getting a lot of playtime within LPL. He got one other game that was with Clearlove in a series where it was like Clearlove's birthday and they randomly put him in. Clearlove ran it down the first game and GenG got to play the second. That to me should just signify to you guys, or signal to you guys, how bad JJ actually played in that WE series. I mean, it was something special. And yeah, I think he just has super high highs, super low lows, and he is generally less consistent than other LPL junglers. That being said, he did have a great finals, so you have to consider that. But I'm a little bit worried about his champion pool at Worlds. It seems like he has always been more of like a one tricky type of jungle, where he'll pick something, and until you answer it and you answer it well, he is just going to keep on picking the same champion over and over again. But if people do attack his champion pool, we'll have to see what he's able to pick up and pull out, because there are so many different junglers that are now available that I wonder if he has the ability to master them all, or what he's going to do about finding picks that really suit his playstyle. For example, in playoffs, he played Lee, Viego, and Olaf. Those are the only champions that he actually won on. I think he also played Xin, and he was 0-3, and he played a Diana game, which he lost as well. But the biggest issue that I see here is that Lee is such high priority that other teams are most likely going to be picking it. It's going to be hard to get your hands on. Also, since he performed so well on it in finals, teams are going to prep, want to take it away from him, potentially ban it. And Olaf is not a pick that you can just get every single, or that you can play every single game. If the enemy team doesn't have CC and has mobile carries, it can be an absolute dog shit pick, can straight up lose you a game. And then Viego has been nerfed. I mean, we're barely seeing Viego at all at Worlds. So the issue for me is his champion pool. All right, let's move on. So for T1, the title that I gave them was less than the sum of their parts. So when you look at T1, they have extremely talented individual players. And you feel like with this roster, they should be just the best team in the world, or one of the absolute best teams in the world. But I guess we'll get into the weaknesses later. It just doesn't feel like they've actually hit that level. Guma, Yushi, and Keria actually seem like one of the few bot lanes at this tournament that could match up into Viper Mako, or potentially beat Viper Mako. So that's a big strength for this group specifically. It seems like Owner has solved their jungle problems for the most part. He seems confident in his direction and how he wants to play the game. And it seems like T1 laners really needed to have that presence in the jungle. And Owner is just fucking insane. Like, the guy is just really talented. If you've watched him play, solo queue, you could just see that he's special. You know, he's got great mechanics, but he also seems very decisive and smart about the game. Faker specifically is in the best form that he's been in like 3 years. I said 2018 here, but maybe you could say 2019. And yeah, I think that the picks that he's playing are strong in the meta. He has really high priority on Azir. Now, Azir definitely has counter picks, but if they give him a later pick, I think that, you know, a lot of the mid laners won't be able to really abuse it. And I'm not sure if mid laners are going to really try to hard counter an Azir pick. I assume that something like LeBlanc will generally be banned. And I'm not sure if people would want to self counter it with things that would be slightly weaker in the early game, like Kassadin, which was an unknown Azir counter. His Rise is really good. Obviously, everyone remembers Faker Rise from like even as far back as like season 5. I remember him winning Worlds on the pick. Obviously, different iteration of the champion, but it's something that is extremely strong right now. It's getting banned a ton, and I'm expecting this ban to come out versus Faker because he seems so good on it. For Faker, I feel like he can always generally lane well and be a major carry threat later on in the game. That's really, really good for them. I feel like T1 needs to have that presence because they have this issue, which I'll get into now in weaknesses, where I don't feel like they have an AD carry that is a complete player. When you watch Teddy, he's good in team fights, but his laning is not as good as Gumayusi's. Gumayusi is really good laning, but then he has issues in team fights. So we'll have to see how this shapes up for T1. I'm expecting Gumayusi to just start and play through for most of the games, but they do have this issue. Generally, T1 has massive disconnects. Like they make plays that just will ruin the game. And I don't think you get to do that versus teams like EDG. We got to see it in finals versus Dobwon. They will just have some really big issues where one play will just go as bad as humanly possible and it will just ruin the game. They will absolutely just destroy everything that T1's built up to that point. That needs to not exist if T1's going to make a deep run. If they're going to win Worlds, they have to just completely shore up this weakness. I went into the AD carry thing where 2 AD carries have different strengths. But yeah, and then I also don't think they respond to mistakes well. As a team, if they have one of these colossal throws, it doesn't feel like they reset and are able to figure out quickly, okay, that happened. The map state is now this. These people are strong. What are we doing? I generally think that once they have one of those throws, it's hard for them to recover, which could be an issue in this tournament. All right, 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves, I have win in 20 minutes or FF. Pretty self-explanatory. So for their strengths, they have good early game, which is extremely important in BO1s because if you win an early game into BO1, that's all you need, right? Like if you're able to get picks that are really strong, carry a game out, that can be the difference between advancing and not. They understand diving on bot lane. I actually had side lanes here originally and I changed it to bot lane. The more I think about them, they don't really ever dive Sumday's lane and he's just pretty much always playing weak side, but they play well with mid and jungle grouping up, going to the bot lane and diving together. This is great. You can create massive leads. You can start snowballing through Dragon. And getting FBI ahead is huge for this team since they play with him as a major carry threat. They've developed a strong identity, which is good for players in games. So they pretty much always play Someday weak side, even if Someday's playing a matchup that could be considered a carry, like a Gnar, for example, which to me is a weak side top laner. People play with it as a weak side top laner most of the time. But even if they play picks that could be seen as carries, or like GP is a carry, but they always play with him weak side, they're essentially just not very good at pressuring top, but they don't need Someday to get pressure to win the game. So I think that the fact that they have a strong identity gives them a focus and it gives them an idea of how they want to win the game. So I think that's a strength in group stage. Other teams are kind of feeling things out. They're trying to see what's going on in the game. But 100 Thieves go into the game of like, hey, we want to, execute like this. We have push at these levels. We can build a wave. We can dive here. Someday you're going to take the L on the other side of the map, just lose the minimum. And because they're so practiced on this, generally they can develop pretty big advantages out of it. Closer was the absolute best player in NA during playoffs. He knows how to accelerate the pace of the game well enough that their weak Baron setups may not be abusable due to lead sides. So yeah, we got to see this in finals versus TL. Sometimes 100 Thieves just stomps you so hard that you can't even fight them. And once they have such a big lead, the fact that they have these like really egregious Baron setups and they have no idea of how they want to play them out, it's not going to matter. They can just walk to the objective. You come anywhere close, they're just going to ace you and take the Baron for free. It's really easy to play from that point in the game. So that is definitely a big advantage. Also, the fact that there's so many new junglers coming into the meta is good for a player like Closer. Closer is really fast at picking up picks. He can play something for the first time, and he's got good enough mechanics and like really good knowledge to understand exactly why something is strong, why it's going to work. He was one of the first adopters of picks like Diana and Viego in North America, and they got a ton of wins off his understanding of those champions where other people didn't know what the fuck they did or like why they were so good. So I think that the fact that the jungle pool has not been figured out yet, and there's a ton of picks that people are still deciding from. They don't know if Talon's good. Is it a Kiana meta? When is Talia good? Are Xin and Lee Sin still the best? Closer as an insane Lee Sin, so that probably won't be an issue. Or is Graves playable? How much Nidalee are we going to see? When the meta is like this, it's super good for somebody like Closer because he can really figure out quickly what is going to be strong for his team and how they're going to get wins. Seems like a lot of strengths, right? Well, too bad they have absolutely terrible late game macro. Actually terrible. If this team has a 5k gold lead against any of the other teams that are considered pretty strong, it feels like they'll almost always lose. They're bad at setting up vision around objectives. And when they do actually set up vision around objectives, they're not able to quickly figure out assignments and what they should do with that vision. So when they start a Baron, most teams have to make decisions of how are we going to play this out? Are we going to turn off the Baron and try to kill them? Are we going to burn? If we do turn, who is going to turn? Off what ability are we turning? Do we zone the enemy jungler and try to finish? Do we back off the Baron completely? Instead of starting the Baron, do we just go there and bait it? They always make the wrong decision. Every single time they make the wrong decision somehow. I don't know how it happens, but this happens in NA. So if you're having this issue so consistently in NA and then you go internationally, it's bad. They have got to win through their early games. They can win through early games. They have a really good bot lane. They have a really good mid lane, a really good jungle. They can win through early game, but if they don't, it's doomed. If they are even at 30 minutes versus T1 or EDG, it is almost a guaranteed loss, but they can probably still 2-0 DFM because DFM has similar issues. Okay, into DFM, boys. DFM, I titled the Korean 5th seed. I was just memeing about it. They have 3 Koreans on their team, so they're the Korean 5th seed. 100 Thieves is, I don't even know what they are. They're the Korean 6th seed, maybe. I don't know. They have 2 Koreans. They have no NA players. Anyways, DFM, their strengths, they have nothing to lose. They can play balls to the wall. That's always an advantage going into these types of games. They've already outperformed everyone's expectations, and they've already succeeded in the eyes of Japanese fans, in the eyes of just the world. This team has done much better than anyone expected. This team is supposed to lose in play-ins, and they ended up making it to group stage as the number 1 seed. They have high priority on certain champions like Urgot and Talon. I don't think that Evi will get Urgot for the rest of the tournament. I think that teams would be dumb not to ban it. Maybe some of these top laners have such big egos that they refuse to let their team ban a champion like Urgot that is considered to not be good all the time. It's a very niche pick. But the fact that they have this priority on champions like Urgot, on champions like Talon, that other people aren't as high on, means that it will open up power picks in the draft for other members. That's really valuable. I think that that's exciting, and they could potentially use it to just get some really big draft advantages. Maybe they get free MF picks. Unipon seems good on it. Can that be enough to win a couple games? Maybe they can get a game or two, but my expectations would actually just be 0-6 here. For weaknesses, I start with not able to play meta top laners at the same level as Urgot. Evi seems like he's good at Urgot and nothing else. He's going to be able to outlane the other top laners in this group. I think he'll get exploited pretty hard by Kana and Flandre. Maybe he can get through Lanus someday, but I don't think that necessarily matters versus 100 Thieves because I feel like 100 Thieves have advantages elsewhere. They don't have world level macro setups, and they just rely on fighting or the enemy making mistakes a lot of the time. The game versus C9 that they ended up losing, or they ended up winning in the tiebreak, they should have lost. If C9 just sat on their vision and didn't engage in the middle of mid lane, they're way too late on the setup. That was going to be soul for C9, and it was just a game losing play. If the enemy team plays disciplined and pokes you out with Zoe Jace, it's really hard to just concede that much space on the map and then try to retake with like 10 to 20 seconds left. Yeah, I just don't think that they're as good as other teams in terms of macro. Wildcard teams generally are never as good. And also NA teams are generally not as good. Some would argue that they're the same thing, but yeah, I just don't think that they will be able to compete with other teams if the games are even remotely even. Also, when you just watch them play, their laning in general is okay, but this is a different level. Play-ins is one thing when you're playing against a bunch of these play-in teams. I mean, BYG really underperformed. UOL just didn't look very good. And then C9, I'm going to say, choked on the last day. Maybe it's not giving them enough credit. I just don't expect much out of this team in group stage. I wasn't that impressed. I thought worse of C9 than I thought of Detonation Focus Me. So I'm going to just say it. I most likely just predict a 0-6, which I still think is a good performance. I still think LJL did way better than I expected, and they can be happy with it. I just don't expect them to do very well in the group stage. All right, we can get into Group C here. As you can see, it's a little bit darker. I had some shows to record, so I ended up taking a little bit of break in between. I have been up for a long time, about like 17 hours at the time of shooting this, and I've streamed a bunch the last couple days. So we're going to try to get through the rest of this video. I got everything written out here, so hopefully I can follow my notes and we can give you guys a good ending to the group rundown. So here we are, Group C. This is going to be RNG getting first, in my opinion, and the reason why I titled them The Forgotten is because in general it seems like no one is really considering them a contender. I've said this a couple times on different shows, so I think more people, at least in my community, have started to pick up how highly I value this team. But yeah, I just think that they're an extremely strong team. I think they're a title contender. So I started off by saying their strengths are literally everything but Cryan, and I think that this is the best way to sum it up. They are world class in terms of every player on the team except for Cryan. Cryan is good, but he functions as an enabler, and he can't really play other styles besides for that, which should be fine. I mean, when you look at Niski has gotten a lot better at playing mages and things like that this year, or at least he's played them at a higher level than he did with C9. But in general, he is similar where the team succeeds most when he is on a roamer. Cryan is the same type of player where he wants to be playing Ryze, he wants to be playing TF, he wants to be playing Galio. And I think the fact that there's multiple different options for him is good. However, these champions do have counters. You know, if anyone is able to play a really good Sylas or something like that in this group, then they might run into some issues. But I think they have a lot of unique advantages. They have extremely good support roams and jungle dive timings around top. They're a top lane focused team. And when you compare RNG to the other teams in this group, you start to feel like their style matches up extremely well. Hanwha Life, weak top laner in Morgan. Fnatic, they always play their top laner weak side in Adam. PSG is not a Hanabi focused team. So I don't actually think that any team will be able to actually contest the strong topside gameplay that RNG always goes for. I mean, they have a distinct style. It's around Xiaohu, and Xiaohu, for my money, is the best top laner in the entire world going into this tournament, and he'll be able to carry a lot of these leads. They still have some of the best Baron setups in the world. They had one series where they actually started choking some of these setups, which is the series versus LNG that they ended up losing in playoffs. But outside of that series, which was an important one, I feel like this team is super clean at their decision making around objectives, and it's part of the reason they won MSI, part of the reason they won LPL in spring, and part of the reason they won so many series in a row in summer. They are mentally resilient. We got to see this versus Dom1. They play well when their back's up against the wall. They're a team that's tough to beat, and they're really good at resetting and trying to figure out how to get back into games that they're behind in at all points. They match up well, like I said, into all other teams in Group C. So yeah, I think that they will be the top team. For weaknesses, Cryan, obviously, like I said, he is a liability. He's essentially in a one trick in terms of playstyle. He does play Orianna. We have seen him pick other things outside of the Galio TF Ryze. It just never feels close to as good. You just want Cryan on an enabler. They have to generally win games through Xiaohu and Gala because of the way that they play, because of the way they draft as well. So they are definitely like a 2-threat team as opposed to some teams that are a 3-threat team, similar to like FPX or something like that. They generally have pretty rigid drafts. They find comps that they like to play and stick to them. So it means that it's easy for enemy teams to prep against what they are playing. So for example, they played a lot of Jason Varus earlier. And once people started banning out Varus, it took them a while to adapt to other picks that would fit in the same type of vein as Varus and the whole team could function well in. Because the way that RNG plays is generally to roam Ming and make him really active on the map. And what that does is it leaves Gala alone bot lane. And when Gala is alone bot lane, he's susceptible to being dove. He's susceptible to being pressured. You know, it's hard for him to actually keep his farm up. So it takes a specific type of champion that's able to do that. That's why when you saw him on Varus, that's why you saw him on Ezreal, Ziggs, they all work so well because they can exist in that type of system. So yeah, they do have weaknesses, but I think that this will be a pretty RNG favored group. All right, so Fnatic coming up next. I have Chaos Style as their name. which I think it's an old UOL term, but I think it kind of is embodied by how Fnatic like to play. They're an extremely proactive team that is constantly looking for plays. They're really open-minded when it comes to moving around the map. And what I mean by this is that a lot of teams feel like they can't make certain plays at certain times because a wave is coming in, or they don't want to get behind themselves. They're afraid of taking the risk of moving, and they'd rather just have the consistency of doing what the correct play is all the time. I feel like Fnatic is very good, and I think that a lot of this comes from Bwipo and Hilly, but I think Niski also has this tendency at being able to assess how much they can potentially gain off a play, and they commit to things really hard with multiple people. One of Adam's biggest strengths is his ability to roam mid. He pushes like first 3 waves and roams mid more than almost any other top laner that I've seen, and that can really throw teams off guard. I think that would work extremely well into HanWillLife, for example. In general, like I said, they work well together as a team. They solve problems with their map states well. People are able to just tell on this team, hey, what do we need to do to get people back in the game? The only time that I see them sometimes struggle is early game around top. Sometimes when Adam gets behind or he's getting pressured really hard, the team doesn't cover him well enough. And I think a lot of that comes from Adam's inexperience himself, not being able to really demand resources and set his team up to actually help him when he needs help. They have strong bot lane, strong laning bot lane. Even though they don't necessarily always play strong lanes, the fact that their laners are actually really good helps them out a lot. And because their bot lane is so good, they're able to set up plays around bot frequently with things like TF, Rise, just Niski's TP, Adam's TP, Bwipo being able to roam at the right time. They're really smart about setting up these types of plays, which means that they are proficient at snowballing advantages. For weaknesses, I said that they are way too horny and they can never cut their losses. I've talked about this a lot, but in general, I feel like Fnatic has struggled thematically just over the course of pretty much the entire season at identifying when something is not fightable. It feels like if you were in their voice comms, all you would hear was, can we turn? Can we fight this? Yo, can we go? Can we go? Let's turn. I've got this ability. They never like, hey, this situation is lost. Let this one person die and let's all run and make sure that we don't end up having this one negative play turn into an egregious, horrible game-losing play. I think their top lane in general, it has a pretty small champ pool. Now, the counter that everyone says to this is, but he played a lot of champions. My problem with this is that every single one of the champions had the same identity, or the majority of the champions have the same identity, which is pretty much exclusively bruisers. Now, I know that Adam in solo queue has been playing more Jace, more Kennen. Definitely good things. If he can play these at a great level, maybe Fnatic can actually make a deep run at Worlds. But so far, we haven't got to see too much of those styles of picks. We haven't seen GP, we haven't seen Jace, we haven't seen Gnar really. We haven't seen Kennen, like I said. All these picks are really important right now. You need to at least be able to play some of them, or else you're going to have some issues in draft. Also, Renekton is something they heavily relied on, and that is now nerfed going into Worlds, so that could be an issue. They also have a heavy prio on champs that suit their style, their playstyle, that don't necessarily have good laning phase, such as Rakan. So even though they do have a strong laning bot lane, sometimes they pick lanes that are so weak in lane that they will end up just getting behind based off purely matchup. So they can end up giving up kills. They can end up being pressureless. This can be an issue for Fnatic. All right, PSG. So PSG, I didn't want to talk too much about. I have very little information against them. I watched their series against BYG, and then we saw BYG completely shit the bed in play-ins. My general consensus, or like my general idea when I watched them, was just that they were worse with Unified than they are with Doggo. Like, Unified still looks good, and especially from watching his solo queue, I feel like he's a mechanically good player. I just think that Doggo suited them better for some reason. So I want to see how they do. I think that they will be better than HanWillLife, but I'm just not really sure how high they'll actually peak in a tournament like this. And the fact that BYG did so poorly, it made me think less of PSG because the series was so close. The two series were so close between PSG and BYG. So for now, we'll move on. HanWillLife, aka Chovy Life Esports. Their strengths are just Chovy, bro. Just Chovy. That's all it is. Chovy's really good. Sometimes Deft can be good, but for the most part, they rely on Chovy carrying the entire world. I really dislike how this team plays. I think it's pretty much Chovy or bust, and I thought that they were relatively weak in play-ins. They were much worse than I expected. They have poor coordination between their jungle support. They don't roam well. They don't take vision well together with their jungle and support themselves. They don't communicate on how they want to play out certain situations. This is a big one. When you watch Willer fight with Vista, it feels like they aren't on comms together. It literally feels like they're playing solo queue. One person will engage, you'll see Vista flash stun a guy, and then you'll see a spear just going at the other one from Willer. And it just seems so uncoordinated and unpracticed. And it's just super weird to watch, especially in a competitive environment when you see a Korean team, because normally Korean teams are very precise about how they take their fights. They're not very loose with how many fights they decide to take. They're conservative, but when they take a fight, they normally execute extremely well, which this team doesn't. Yeah, Morgan, massive liability. Sometimes he's okay. He might be okay into somebody like Adam, but I don't think it'll be good enough. Into Xiaohu, I believe he's just going to get completely stomped. I think PSG has a chance to exploit Morgan themselves. Yeah, I think that just in general, massive liability. The team generally does not play side lanes well in the mid game. They send Chovy to the side lane and they're like, yo, bro, you farm and you come back to us when you're strong enough to carry this game. It's not like they play around the side lane or they're shadowing Chovy with multiple members and they're waiting for the enemy team to walk up and make a mistake, or they're using the push in side lanes really well and then grouping and taking objectives. It just kind of feels very old school in a way, where they're just farming until something good kind of happens and then Chovy will just join, or he'll just get strong enough to win the game alone. So yeah, I just was not very high on HLE before. Yeah, just from watching Korea, I was not that hype on HLE coming into play-ins, and I thought in play-ins they underperformed. I think Chovy also had a weaker play-in stage himself than expected. Most people thought he was just going to run over everyone, and yeah, he had some sketchy games, so we didn't get to see exactly what we were hoping for. Okay, and here we are finally in Group D. Mad Lions, I have them getting out number one, the mid-game kings. So their strengths, they have a lot of them, but I think the biggest one is that they are hyper resilient to gold deficits. Part of the reason they're so good in the mid game is because when they go into a mid game 5k gold down, they don't just stop playing the game. They're extremely smart about knowing their own timings and when they can retake vision or fight regardless of gold disadvantages. So when the enemy team approaches a situation, they use their wards or something like that, kha'zix will be able to call, hey, they have no vision in this area, let's look for a pick on this guy, or we pushed in a side wave. Somebody has to go catch that side wave. Can we get a 4v5 fight in this specific area? So I really like seeing this from Mad Lions. I feel like this reminds me of G2 in a way, back from 2019, where regardless of what happened in the early game, it felt like they always were going to beat you mid to late game. Now, Mad Lions isn't quite as good at mid to late game compared to the rest of the world, but they have that same quality that just makes you feel like they have the ability to upset anyone and beat anyone on a good day. They have strong meta champion pools. The only person that I would say has potential champion pool issues for this could be Armut, but generally from watching Armut, I think one strength he has is that he identifies that he's not going to be able to play everything, but he normally is able to just add like 1 or 2 extra champions in one of these events, or like playoffs or spring or MSI. He was able to add 1 or 2 champions, which bolsters the champion pool enough to the point where you can't ban him out, right? So you have Gnar, you have Wukong. Everyone knows he plays those. He plays J-Swell too, which is a big one. And then GP. And the thing that I like about his champion pool is even though he doesn't play a lot of champions, he plays different champions that can fit into multiple different team comps. So really like that about Armut. Even though he is the only person that doesn't have the strict, like, I play everything meta champion pool. Also, Mad Lions, excellent at team fighting. If you're going to be a good mid to late game team, you're going to have to be good at team fighting because that's where a lot of the team fights occur. So obviously they are strong at team fights. A lot of it comes down to kha'zix, great at playing engages. Humanoid understands how much damage to put out in a fight. And one thing that Humanoid has gotten so much better at over time is not dying at the beginning of team fights. He used to be the type of player where he was going to either carry the entire team fight and do the most damage you have ever seen, or he was just going to die at the beginning of it or get caught and, you know, his team would just pretty much lose the game because of it. He's became so much better at this. It's part of the reason I have him so highly in my top 10. Normally when a player has a big weakness like this, they're not able to just completely eliminate it, but it feels like Humanoid has pretty much never done this in recent memory. So gotta respect that a lot. Mad Lions in general, they coordinate their TPs as a team resource. Super important. They don't look at their TP as, oh, I'm just going to TP here because it's good for me. They think about each TP as, what is this TP costing us? And if I do use this TP, what are we going to potentially lose or not be able to do because my TP is down? I think more teams should definitely think like this, and it just shows a level of coordination that other teams don't have. This one is like, I guess kind of cheesy, but it's something that I really believe, so I left it in here. Which when I watch this team, they're always smiling, they're always having fun. It feels like this team truly believes in each other. And that really matters when it comes to beating better teams. They look at each other and they think, hey, we can win this game. Like, it doesn't matter what happens. Just give it our best and we'll see what happens. The way that I would define this, or the way that I would talk about this, is like having mental presence, not going in games thinking about anything other than what is currently occurring in the game and what you need to do to win. Huge strength for Mad Lions. Okay, next we have weaknesses for Mad Lions. One of their weaknesses that I've noticed is that they play a very loose, aggressive style, which isn't necessarily a weakness in and of itself. The problem that I have with the way that they play is that generally, if they end up losing, they lose harder than they should in the early game, and sometimes that does make it unrecoverable, even though they have a fantastic mid game. The term loose aggressive, it comes from poker. The idea behind it is based on how many different starting hands that you're willing to play in poker, and the way that the theory kind of works is that when you're loose aggressive, it means that you're playing more starting hands in poker. So this would be in League opting into a lot of situations. And when you opt into so many situations, you potentially lose bigger because you're just betting a lot more, you're calling a lot more, you're entering a lot more pots. And in general, there's advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages of playing a loose aggressive style is the ability to kind of mask when you're strong. If you're playing so many pots and you're essentially bluffing a lot, people's mentality is, oh, this guy most likely doesn't have it. And I feel like Mad Lions do the same type of thing. If you're trading a lot in a game, it's less obvious when your jungler is there. But if you're trading in ways that don't necessarily make sense and the enemy calls you on it, the enemy fights you back, they can get a bunch of free kills because you actually don't have the support that you might be pretending that you have in the situation. So I feel like this could be an issue. And part of this leads into the next thing that I'm going to say, which is about how they act as a best of one team. Generally, Mad Lions is not super good in best of ones, which could be bad. Obviously, you have to win best of ones to get into the next stage. So they're not the best of one team. We saw it in spring. We saw it in summer. We saw it at MSI. They generally do better in best of fives where they can really use the fact that they are mentally resilient. We'll have to see how this plays out because I still do think they are the best team, and I think they've gotten better pretty much every single tournament they've gone to, from spring to MSI to summer. It feels like they've consistently got better and became more stable. And obviously, this team has been prepping for this all year. It became pretty obvious to them probably around summer that they most likely are going to go to Worlds. They won spring. They went to MSI. There's no reason to believe that they wouldn't go to Worlds. So hopefully they're able to manage their like burnout and stuff, and they are able to peak at the right time. But best of ones, a little bit scared because of their track record with them. They're also prone to the G2-esque happy games. So G2 always had this meme where they would randomly run it down and just have like these super bad games. The way they would characterize it was like, oh, that was just a happy game. They just have games where they int. Mad has just games that they int. I feel like they got it from, you know, just modeling themselves off the team that was the best in their region for so long. And the other thing that I said earlier, which I don't think should be the biggest issue, but I just wanted to note in weaknesses, the champ pool issues of Armut. He just won't be able to play every single top laner at the tournament. Shouldn't be something that means that Mad Lions can't advance or can't potentially make semifinals or whatever. But it is something that can be exploited if he isn't able to add those 2 or 3 unique picks into his champion pool to really bolster it out. Okay, GenG. I have them second in this group, even though I think there's a chance they might be third. But, you know, there's always some type of upsets at Worlds, and I just think that GenG is going to disappoint me again by making the bracket stage, only to go 0-3 to, I don't know, some team. They'll get out second. They'll play Dom1 or EDG or some shit. Like, let's say Dom1 outperforms, gets first. GenG will play them. We'll get a 3-0 best of 5 between 2 Korean teams in the quarterfinals again. Can't wait. It's going to be awesome. Anyways, GenG, they are completely soulless. This team has no heart, no soul. They have skill. They're a pretty good team, but they just don't. They're the opposite of Mad Lions. They got no heart. Mad Lions have all the heart. GenG have no heart. They have no heart, no soul. So generally their strengths, they have an average high level of individual players. All their players are good. And each one of their players has had the potential to be someone who is the best in the world at their position. With the exception of Rascal, each one of these players has been considered extremely good at some point. Life last year as a support in Korea. Ruler, obviously world champion, one of the best mechanical ADs. People were super hyped on him before. Clid in 2019. I thought this guy was probably the best jungler at the tournament. I know everyone would say Tien, but I think Clid was so good at that tournament. He just didn't have the support to actually show it. And then BDD, you've always hoped that he was a little bit better than he ended up being. I remember when he was a sub for CJ Entus way back in the day. This guy was hyped up as the next Faker, as most talented mids in career are. But I've always thought that this guy had potential to be great, but he's just missing some element of maybe like mentality, or maybe he's missing some element of heart in his gameplay that just makes it feel like he's not going to win when it really matters. He's not necessarily a choker, but he's just not super clutch either. That being said, I do think that this team can make it out. I mean, they're a slower paced team, but they are consistent. Once they get leads, they normally don't throw their leads. You have Life. He's a strong tank support player, which allows them to play through bot and engage team fights well. Once they have cemented leads, they have generally good laning. They're 1v1 laning from BDD. They're 2v2 laning from Ruler and Life. It's not flawless. They don't win every lane, but it's generally good. I think for this group, they shouldn't have any issues where they're just getting smashed up and down in lane. And then I also think that meta-wise, Lee Sin being back in the meta is extremely good for GenG. Clid, one of the best Lee Sin players in the world in Season 8, Season 9. His mechanics don't look as good as they used to be, but still, I believe that Lee Sin will be something that Clid will always be able to play super well, even if he doesn't know about the Q2 execute. We'll see who gets that reference. All right, weaknesses. They collapse extremely quickly when met with resistance. They have no resilience, essentially, is what I meant to say. So if you go out and you punch GenG in the mouth, you get a good dive off, you get control of the game, it feels like they're so okay with losing. They have that same quality that Rogue does that we talked about earlier, where if things happen that they don't expect and they feel pressured, completely shut down, they feel almost like they're okay losing. Also, when these things happen, kind of feeds into the next thing, they become extremely passive. It's not like they lose and they are trying to work their way back in. They're just like, hey man, take everything. Take our entire jungle, take vision, take dragons. We are here to lose slowly. Hate this quality. It's one of the reasons I am a resident GenG hater, even though I am randomly picking them to get out of this group. They heavily rely on Ruler and BDD to carry games late, just like the standard 2-carry Korean style from way back in the day. They seem like just an old Korean team, which Korean teams like now are much different in the way they're constructed. But this is something that I've noticed about them. They have that traditional front to back 2-carry style. And like I said, they give too much when they're behind. All right, next team. I hate talking about GenG, so we're going to skip over them kind of quickly. Okay, next team, LNG, the Dark Horse. This is a team that I think could potentially make a deep run. They have some qualities that just remind me of Suning, like the really strong carry top laner that not many people know about, that don't watch LPL, that can break out onto the scene. I know that in play-ins, people were very impressed with Ale, and I was kind of like harsh with him compared to, I guess, general people. I mean, he went 26-3, like kills to death wise. He was super good in terms of carrying his leads late, but I think he can be even better than he was. Even in an interview, I forget if it was an interview or if it was just a screenshot of DMs on Twitter or something, but publicly it was available that he said, hey, I don't think I've really shown what I'm capable of. And I agree with that, actually. I think that he played lanes much better in LPL. A lot of times in play-ins, he was just kind of getting by having a champion that scaled well and being able to just scale into the point where he was just unkillable. Like in the side lane or unkillable in 1v1, whatever the case may be. But this guy has another level that people haven't seen yet, where he is actually just a strong laner on these carry picks, which is so frightening. You have a Fiora that's absolutely smashing lane. It feels like the game is unplayable. You have a Jax that's smashing lane, a Camille that's smashing lane. That can really just ruin your entire team's, it could ruin the enemy team's chances to actually win the game. In terms of LNG, they have one of the best junglers in the world in Tarzan. Everyone knows how good this guy is. Since he was with Griffin, he's always been regarded super highly. And one thing that I absolutely love about Tarzan is his ability to find picks that will win you the entire game. He's so smart about reading the entire enemy team comp and figuring out, oh, here's this really niche champion that can just make it unplayable for them. Zach is a great example of this. If you pick a mobile mid, a mobile bot, and then you don't have a jungler that can invade him or actually disrupt his pathing, it's done. This guy is just going to absolutely run over the game with a champion like Zach. He can play Gragas, he can play Kiana, he can play Graves. It's really just open to him. And I think that part of what LNG ended up doing in group stage, or in the group stage of play-ins, was play champions that might not be super high prio for them, but people are going to always be thinking about, oh man, can we draft this? Like Tarzan Olaf, Tarzan Gragas, Tarzan Kiana, which one is he going to pick? Tarzan Graves. So I love the fact that he was able to pick all those champions and have success on them, because it makes them look so much more scary going into this group stage. Also, drafting, kind of difficult against LNG. Most teams are forced to ban Camille into Ale, because not only does Camille, is Ale a really great Camille, he also has all the counters to Camille available to himself. So a lot of people don't want to even deal with that whole game. Like, do we try to take Camille away? Do we just let him have Camille and counter it? Might as well just ban it. The problem is that then there are other champions that people are going to be playing frequently that Ale has counters to as well. So he has the Jax, he has the Fiora, he has the Camille, and then he can play all the stuff that's standard right now. Gwen is coming back into the meta. He can play that. He still has the ability to play Kennen, which is perfectly fine in the meta. We saw him play Jace. He is your carry top laner who can smash everyone in this group outside of maybe Alphari. Also, LNG, they have great use of support jungle roaming to maintain deep vision and strangle out enemies once a lead is secured. A lot of this comes from IWandi. IWandi is the main shot caller on this team. If you listen to LNG voice comms, he is talking the entire time, and he is somebody who the whole team looks to for direction. It seems like that is the style that a lot of LPL teams actually have these days. Mako does the same thing. Ming does the same thing. It's the way that these games are generally played. All right, so for weaknesses, they don't make active plays when behind. This used to be way more of a problem than it has been recently, but it's something that I've noticed before. Part of the reason why this team did so poorly in spring, and I say did so poorly, they did make playoffs, but in general, they were a 10th place team in LPL. They looked like the clear 10th place team, and people just weren't very hyped on the team, was because they were very methodical in the way they played out their games, and they weren't as willing to fight back. They're not very good at taking fights that don't look good. Their mentality is, if it doesn't look good, don't take the fight. But at some point, you actually need to make a stand and actually do something proactive from behind. And I think that LNG can sometimes struggle with this. Icon is generally inconsistent. He's not super inconsistent. It's not like he's bad, but he does have off games. And when Icon has an off game, then Tarzan's getting invaded, and as soon as Tarzan starts getting invaded, the entire team shuts down, and everything is just doomed for them. Overall, I think they have an over-reliance on jungle being involved in every single play that is made. So it feels like if Tarzan isn't able to participate, they just don't want to do it. Sometimes Ale will go for a solo kill, but I'm talking about team plays, which I'm expecting them to have to do more of in the group stage, with the teams being better here than they were in play-ins. So if Tarzan's not involved, they're not making a play. Sometimes you got to make plays without your jungler, and they feel a little bit hesitant to do that. Last but not least, closing it out, onto TL and their tag. You know what it always is, man. Forever fourth. Okay, strengths of TL. They have a great laning top laner in Alphari, one of the best laning top laners in the entire world. They can rely on top prio, regardless of matchup. A lot of the times we'll have to see into Ale, but a lot of the times this is true. Core JJ is an excellent roaming support player. So if they are in a situation where the enemy team is disrespecting supports like level 3 Core JJ bases, if you're not used to playing against Core JJ, you got to be careful top. You got to be careful in top jungle. Core JJ is willing to roam and kill you anywhere on the map. He is literally playing a second jungler, which definitely has its drawbacks at points. But if you don't respect it, it will snowball the entire game. This is a big strength for TL if they're able to get cheese roams like this off. And I say cheese roams, but you could just say good roams in general like this off. Then TL will have a much easier chance in the group stage. Maybe they won't get fourth. Also, wanted to state the tactical looked a lot better in LCS playoffs. He had this issue in spring where he was always inting. People remember the Tristana jumps. People were making memes about how Tristana jump just was a Malphite ult in Tactical's mind. He even named himself Unstoppable Force, which is Malphite's ulti name, on his account in EU West for the boot camp, because this was just such a prevalent idea around him. I feel like he's stopped jumping into the whole enemy team and dying, but he still sometimes does get caught before dragons and stuff like that, and this is just an issue that TL have. In general, I think Tactical has been playing a lot better. Weaknesses. So one of the biggest weaknesses that I've seen from TL is that they have poor coordination at S5 when reacting to enemy plays. I mean, they essentially lost the entire game versus 100 Thieves, and they lost so much momentum in the series by trying to like double TP match a bot play instead of just letting their bot lane die. They could have taken top turret, they could have taken Herald, they could have done so much on the map instead of trying to respond to this play, but a lot of times it feels like they just agree to make a play without really thinking through all the consequences and weighing all the positives that they could get if they didn't end up committing to that play. So yeah, I think that just in general, their reactions to enemy team plays are not the best. They're prone to being dove on side lanes, and they don't properly set up for plays that the enemy team is prepping for. Goes into what I said earlier. They always have one dragon catastrophe per game. Sometimes it's like a mid lane catastrophe that ends up giving a dragon later, or they end up losing their gold lead. But it feels like for some reason, every single game you watch TL, they'll have one situation where they have control of the game, and for some reason someone gets caught, or for some reason they mess up in a fight, and there is a dragon catastrophe. Everyone's dying. They lose their soul point, lose their mid turret for no reason. They throw a 3k gold lead. This happens so much to this team. And if you're not significantly better than other teams at Worlds, this isn't going to be good enough. You can't have these plays this consistently and expect to actually get out of groups. Also, Jensen, generally not a very proactive mid laner. Right now, from what we've heard, a lot of the meta will be TF, Galio, Ryze. Maybe not so much on the TF, but we know Chinese teams love to play Galio. I think that this is going to be a strong pick throughout the tournament, assuming Tryndamere is banned and things like that. Ryze, just going to be strong, period. This champion will just never die. It's too good at manipulating situations mid to late game. Has solid side lane pressure. Nothing is going to abuse it super hard in mid lane right now. Like Orianna, Syndra just aren't the champions they used to be in terms of mid lane pressure. So Ryze is able to just get through lanes against those. And then Ryze ulti, super good early game at diving side lanes. Super good at getting Barons for free. Like what other champion can you sit in mid lane, ulti to the Baron, and then suddenly all 5 members are at the Baron. You can one-shot the Baron. Super strong competitive play. And I don't think that TL plays that well around this type of style. I don't think that Jensen is super good on those champions. They also have the weakest jungler in the group in current form. Hurts me to say, I love Santorin. I think he's a great player. Obviously, he had his health issues, so he didn't get as many reps in as he probably would like. And generally, the meta doesn't seem super Santorin friendly. I don't feel like Santorin will be great at things like Talon, Kiana, Talia. Just doesn't sound like Santorin to me. He's normally a good ganking player. Maybe he could play something like Jarvan. That could be really good for him. But he was always an excellent Trundle player. So Sejuani isn't super good right now. It is playable in certain spots, but it's not something that I would normally lean towards. Volibear jungle, it's just that's his style of play, and those champions are not really good right now. And I don't think he's had enough time to really acclimate and get his mechanics back to the point that they're normally at, where he can just take over games as a carry jungler. So yeah, I think that this Worlds might be rough for Santorin. And the last thing I wanted to end with would be the downside of CoreJJ's roams. Said it before, CoreJJ loves roaming. He loves doing the level 3. I was bot lane. I based at 3 minutes. You're never going to expect me in topside jungle. You're never going to expect me to dive top lane. Why is the support here? Oh my God, the whole game is over. He loves doing that. But if teams don't give in and let him get these plays off, he ends up so far behind in experience that a lot of the times the 2v2 is just over. He'll come back to lane. He'll be a level down. Enemy team's going to hit 6 before him. That can set up dives. That can set up 2v2 kills. And I think that just they can lose so much if these plays don't work out. And I feel like the teams that are playing against CoreJJ are going to be prepping for them. If I'm sitting here telling you, yo, CoreJJ loves to roam, be careful level 3 top. You're telling me the analysts for these teams aren't saying the same thing. Maybe they like kind of slide under the radar, knowing that there's most likely the team that is considered the weakest in the group, so teams aren't going to prep for them as much. But I think that this will be something that everyone is privy to, and I don't expect them to have the same level of roaming success at Worlds as he had sometimes in NA. So that's going to be it, boys. This was a long day. This was a 17-hour day. I'm currently finishing this video at 10:30 p.m. at night, but I wanted to get this video out for group stage. Just wanted to give my takes, compile them, write some stuff down, just think about the games and put myself in the right mind space for group stage. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that type of stuff, and I'll keep on bringing you this type of content if you enjoyed it. Good night, guys.